Welcome to Wilder. Today, I am honored to be joined here by Sergius Hannan, who is an outstanding photographer based up in Alaska and was a winner in both of my two previous live wildlife photography competitions that I've hosted. And, as a little sneak peek, is going to be a judge in this year's upcoming competition. Sergius, it's great getting to have you on here today. I have long admired your work, and something that kind of stands out to me about your photography is the way that you're able to work with capturing light in your photography. What's kind of your strategy or philosophy when it comes to capturing light in your images?
Yeah, so my main goal with wildlife photography is to try to come up with images that stand out, that sort of stop the scroll, as they say. Something that people haven't seen as much before, whether that's interesting lighting of a common species or dramatic lighting or harsh conditions with a more elusive species. Light is just another tool that I'm able to utilize to help my work stand out, whether that's silhouettes, backlit, rim lighting. It's a good way to highlight some of those more common species in a new way. And it's also a way to really enhance any sort of encounter with one of the more elusive species, like an owl or a muskox, for example.
Yeah, I love that. I always get so jealous of you guys up in Alaska because, those seasons where you have those long golden hours and all of that stuff. And I feel like that must be a huge perk probably of getting to live in Alaska, is those extended hours of light where you get a lot of really nice light and all of that stuff. But your work does an awesome job of capturing that. Living in Alaska, do you feel like being in Alaska affects the way you capture light very much, through whether that be your compositions or just the light itself, so on and so forth?
Absolutely. I think any environment sort of alters the approach that a photographer might take in some way. Alaska has some unique characteristics that set it apart. One being the fact that we just get so much sunlight in the summertime. Depending on where you are, you might have 24 hours of sunlight. Here in Homer, it's a little bit more moderate. Our longest days are about close to 20 hours of daylight. But I was just on a photography workshop that I hosted up in Nome, and we had to flip our sleep schedules because, well, for a couple reasons, I guess. One is that the heat haze gets really bad for photography. Trying to photograph anything further than about 25 yards, you start running into a lot of different issues where you've got this really harsh sun hitting the permafrost and the cold ground for hours and hours, and it just creates this unusable sort of atmosphere that you're not able to get clear photos through. So that is one reason, one great reason to flip your sleep schedule if you're ever photographing wildlife up towards the Arctic. Another is that the sun was setting there at about 2 a.m. and it rose at 5 a.m. And the sun never actually got that low below the horizon. So for the entire time frame between about 10 p.m. to 7 a.m., we had some pretty nice light to work with minimal heat distortion. And that's just an incredible experience. Being able to follow these muskox herds around and photograph different migratory songbirds and shorebirds nesting in the tundra. It's just such a wild experience being out with these incredible animals in such a beautiful landscape at 3 a.m. when you probably won't see another soul out there on those roads.
Yeah.
And that's actually saying something. In Nome in the springtime, there are a lot of bird tours that go there, late May to early June. And so in the daytime, you'll be seeing vans driving up and down the 3 highways there all day long. But at night, you're pretty much the only person in sight, and it's a pretty magical experience.
Yeah, I bet. Yeah, that was an awesome experience. It wasn't quite that extreme when I was in Norway, but when I was in Norway, the sun was setting around, I believe it was like 11 p.m. and rising around 3:30 a.m. or something. Maybe 4. I don't remember exactly. But yeah, the sun like would barely dip below the horizon. There were some nights where like you could barely see the light in the sky all night long, right? And it's quite a cool experience getting to do that. And it's I can imagine it's so important to flip that sleep schedule when that's the best time to work with it. And most people aren't willing to do it, which makes it all the better because then you're out there alone, like you said. So
definitely. And I had the benefit of having a lot of clients that were from Alaska and had some experience chasing northern lights at night. So that prepares you a little bit for sort of just going off the whims of the climate and the aurora activity and just whatever Alaska's throwing your way. You just gotta be highly adaptable and appreciate all of it.
Yeah. What are the pros and cons of doing wildlife photography in Alaska?
So one con is that there's really limited road access in Alaska. There are about 600, maybe 700,000 people, residents in Alaska. Just about half of those live in Anchorage. And we have all this incredible habitat to explore. There are countless state parks, national forests, etc. But very few roads that actually go into them. So it does require quite a lot of hiking to access certain areas, or in the winter, skiing, snow machines. You kind of have to get creative to find some of the interesting species out there. But the benefit is you're almost guaranteed. If you hike a couple miles off the road, you're almost guaranteed to find something interesting. It's just such amazing, lively habitat, whether that's owls, moose, bears.
Yep.
So that is an amazing perk. But another con I would say is, when you're first starting to get into bird photography, a lot of people use eBird. A lot of people use these Facebook groups, whatever sort of assets they're able to find online where they get these locations and you're able to find your first owl species that you're interested in, or warbler, whatever it is, understanding some of their migration patterns. You can sort of look all that up online because you have the data. And Alaska, unfortunately, doesn't have all that reporting happening just due to the low population here. So a lot of it just comes down to putting in the work yourself and just going out to the right habitat, learning what that is, and just kind of doing some investigation. So it's a lot of fun if you have the time to go find some of that habitat, but not everybody does. A lot of people have these jobs they have to get back to and families to get home to. So I'm definitely benefiting by the fact that I'm solo, like freelance, self-employed at the moment, and actually have the time to commit and investigate some of these areas.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, it's I would imagine you get a lot less of the casual kind of birder and wildlife photographer out there in Alaska because I know even for myself, like back when I knew nothing, that was a lot of how I started getting into it and learning and finding anything was just by going on eBird and like, okay, where's the bar charts for, this area? Okay, we can get these species through. Now, where are they at? Let's, like zone in on the, explore species. Where are all the sightings of that species in my county? And all that stuff. So I can imagine it'd be difficult. So a while ago, you impressed me with a film that you created on capturing the incredibly remote and kind of elusive herd of caribou up on the Kenai Peninsula. It was just an awesome film and I really, really liked it. Can you tell me a little bit about how this remote group of caribou kind of like lives and what makes them so special?
Yeah, man, that was a fun project. And that kind of goes back to my point about just having to get off the road a little bit and put the time and effort into going to these more remote areas and finding these amazing species. But that all sort of started, so when I was little, I grew up on the Kenai Peninsula where these caribou were eventually reintroduced. but I didn't know that they existed. They are far off the road system. Hardly anybody actually knows that they exist here on the Kenai Peninsula up in these mountains. And they've got an interesting story because they were, caribou were hunted to extinction on the Kenai Peninsula, I believe in the early 1900s. And eventually the Department of Fish and Game decided to reintroduce them using a population up north of Anchorage, the Nelchina herd. And so they helicoptered a few of those out and drove it down to the Kenai Peninsula, released them at the foothills of the Kenai Mountains, and eventually they made their way up to the mountains. And year round, you can find them up there, where they just live on their lichen and travel up to the mountain ridges in the winter to find food. These kind of snow-blown ridges is where they find a lot of the really good habitat for foraging for lichen. And so it's just a really unique situation where you've got this population that actually came from a migratory herd up in Nelchina, and now they've sort of adapted to the environment, and they exclusively live in this very small area relative to what their ancestors sort of went through. So that's a very cool thing about them. And then just the fact that they're up in these mountains just makes them that much more enticing as a wildlife photographer. To go find these incredible charismatic megafauna in such a beautiful habitat.
Yeah, totally. A lot of times the harder it can be to get something makes it just that much more rewarding and that much more exciting doing the whole hunt. Something I've been wanting to do for a really long time, that I still plan on doing someday, just haven't gotten around to it, is doing the Himalayan snowcock up in the Ruby Mountains in the United States. And up in the Ruby Mountains in Nevada, it's the only population of Himalayan snowcock in the whole country. They were introduced like way back early 1900s, but since then they've stayed just in the high summits of the Ruby Mountains there. And just a beautiful bird with this amazing call that sounds like an elk, and it's quite fascinating. But that's something like, that's a bird that for a while I've been like really wanting to go after. There's like 200, 300 of them up in those summits, and you have to really work hard to get those shots. So hopefully I'll get to do that someday. But yeah, I think you did a really good job in your film of representing just how elusive and kind of majestic that experience is of trying to capture those caribou. So it was very cool to see. What was the hardest part of that trip for you?
Thanks, man. I appreciate that. And just quickly to go back on sort of my point about, how ways in which you're able to make your work stand out. That's got to be one of the easiest, at least in theory, the easiest way to set your work apart is to just put in the effort that no one else is willing to go through. No one's out there up on these mountain ridges as snow is starting to fall down. It's a guaranteed way to make your images stand out. So that sounds like a really exciting trip you've got planned there. Yeah.
And I know you follow Lyrone too, that who I interviewed recently on the podcast. And his images are just phenomenal. And he's like, man, when I see his images and like when I was talking to him and seeing how much work he puts into each image, I was like, whew, yeah, you do not go cheap on anything. Like he's spending days to get each of his shots. So you're totally right. It makes your images stand out a lot when you're just willing to put in that extra effort. So
definitely. I'm sorry, I forgot the question that you asked at the last.
Yeah, what was the hardest part of that trip going to capture those caribou?
It definitely has to be just the physical toll that it takes biking 50 plus pounds of gear in your backpack, and where you could fit it on the bike, which you could only distribute it so much across a small bike like that. And just biking uphill 10 miles up into the mountains was pretty grueling. So yeah. Yeah, you have some amazing work, as I've said before, but I briefly kind of wanted to get into two of my favorite images of yours so that we could talk about maybe a little bit of your vision that you had in capturing them. First of all, you have this phenomenal image that I really, really love of a musk ox running at twilight. And I think you said it was 2 a.m. in the morning on the caption, and just some incredible pink and blue light in the background.
what was kind of your vision in capturing that photo and kind of capturing a little bit of that motion blur in the scene and all of that stuff?
Yeah, so that was an awesome experience. I was with some really good friends. Jamin Hunter Taylor, who's been on the podcast, he was kind enough to lend me his 500 f4 prime for that experience, and we just pulled up to this muskox herd, and there were a few that were kind of straggling behind on the opposite side of the road, and they were starting to meet up with them one by one, and the last one decided to just take off and sprint up to the rest of the group. And I just happened to get out of the car at the right time and fired off a few shots. So there wasn't a whole lot of planning involved. Happened to have a usable shutter speed. It was 1/125, and just happened to be usable and had a little bit of the sky in there. So I was really thrilled to see that pink band at 2 a.m. where the sun is just below the horizon and you're starting to get some really nice colors coming through.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, it's such a phenomenal image with that color and that light that we were talking about earlier. And yeah, I mean, sometimes that's how it goes, where you only got 4 frames, like you said, but then, you know, one of them magically somehow works out at those low shutter speeds. And I don't know if you were handheld at the moment, but I would assume so if you're hopping out quick out of the car. And I'm glad you're able to land that, because yeah, that's a fantastic image. You also have another image that's one of my favorites and actually placed 3rd in last year's competition that I hosted. And yeah, just blows me away. I think if it was up to me, I think I would have actually placed that image a little higher in the competition, but I'm not a judge, so it's not up to me. But what was the vision in that image you took of the great gray owl amidst kind of that dark forest scene? And I'm curious to hear why. I notice with your work, you very often choose to go with dark and moody exposures, like that one.
What can I say? I like mood.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think I like to just sort of encapsulate the scene that I saw at the time best I can. And part of that means darkening some of those colors, some of those exposures when it was captured after sunset or before sunrise. And that was a scenario where it was incredibly dark. It was 30 minutes after sunset and it was snowing. So extremely low light scenario. And I was handheld once again. And I was shooting at about 1/20th of a second. I believe I had a few frames at 1/10th, but can't remember if they were sharp or not. But that's the one that I was pretty happy with, where he kind of had his head turned around while his body was facing away. It's just this beautiful pose. And so in my editing decision there, you know, I wanted to show that it was that sort of moody scene, and I wanted to bring out the best of the colors in the spruce trees in the background, and just sort of elicit that cold environment that I was shooting it in. So I brought down the temperature just a touch as well.
So it's a little bit early, but since the competition is coming out soon anyways, I'm excited to share that you will be actually brought on as a judge this year, rather than just a participant and a competitor in the 2024 Wildlife Photography Competition. But now that you've competed in the live competition, what is your favorite part about the competition that I host and that you've enjoyed the past 2 years? And what are you most excited for coming on as a judge for this year's 2024 competition?
Well, first of all, thanks so much for inviting me on to be a judge. I'm definitely honored to have that position this year. What I've loved about the whole competition is just the community aspect, getting to chat with other photographers while the judges are making their decisions, and just appreciating every image that was submitted. And you know, you get some beautiful submissions in your contest, and it's just really cool to see everyone sort of come together in this constructive way in the wildlife photography community, and just make some friends and have a good time. That's what I'm most excited for with the competition itself. As a judge, I'm really looking forward to meeting some of the other judges that I'll be working with. I know you have some extremely talented photographers join the panel, so really looking forward to that. And yeah, I'm just excited to see what comes out of this competition. You never know what sort of gems might be submitted this year.
Yeah, totally. Yeah, I'm excited to have your perspective on as a judge. And you've earned it with getting placements over the past 2 years. So, yeah, excited to have that perspective. And yeah, I agree. That's definitely the thing that I get feedback on the most every year is like people are always just like, whoa, like it is so cool having that community and like seeing people encourage one another. And I think like, especially in a world where I think the majority of content is either very independently, like it could still be very encouraging or inspirational, but independent kind of feels removed. Like it feels like one person is doing it and everyone else is just watching, right? Which is not bad by any means, but it just is the majority of content is either that, or sometimes I feel like the other way that a lot of times you see community involvement in our culture can be negative. Kind of like rallying against something. It's so cool, I think, to kind of have this space where people are coming together in a positive atmosphere, in a positive light to kind of, be there and encourage one another. So I'm glad that you feel the same way.
Yeah, and there are a few photographers that I followed from the last couple competitions that I still follow on Instagram, and I look forward to seeing their work, and they're just incredible photographers and seem like great people as well.
Totally. Yeah. There's a lot of people that I would have never met personally if I didn't see them in the competition and so on and so forth. And like the Norway trip that I just went on, the guy that I met up with over there, the wildlife photographer, was someone who won one of the categories the first year that I put on the competition. Had no idea who he was before. So, making that connection virtually and digitally and then getting to meet him in person now. So it's really cool. How would you define yourself as an artist? Would you what would you give yourself, I guess, as a title? If you were to title yourself, would it be wildlife photographer, content creator, photography guide, field expert, and why?
I guess it depends on who I'm talking to. But
Is it a client?
publicly,
Is it
I
not?
guess I recognize myself. Yeah, I think I mostly recognize myself as a wildlife photographer, although, I do freelance video, I do some real estate photography,
Hmm.
the YouTube channel, and then I do a lot of guiding as well. But what gets me coming back, time and time again is just the passion that I have for wildlife and going after these elusive species and trying to come up with creative compositions in dramatic light or harsh conditions. That's really what just drives me at the end of the day. So yeah, I definitely consider myself more of a wildlife photographer.
Mm. That's what gets you up and at it every day.
Definitely.
Yeah.
Certainly not the real estate, although that pays the bills.
Yeah. Oh, trust me. I've been there. I did weddings for years and definitely got tired of weddings after a while personally. Yeah, I mean, clearly you've managed pretty well at succeeding to grow an Instagram following. I think I forget, I haven't checked in a while, but you're somewhere over 300,000, I know for sure, and you're following on there. What does it mean to you to be I guess, a wildlife photography creator, and how have you found success personally on social media?
What it means to me, I guess, is just, sharing that passion that you have with people, that sort of organic feeling of wanting to share this experience with your friends, your family, the world, to hopefully inspire them to go out and find wildlife for themselves. And I've always just sort of been interested in getting people to realize that there's so many animals out there that you might not know about, even in your backyard. Just all
Mm,
sorts of little, whether that's owls or ground squirrels
yep.
or even little insects. I mean, there's so much habitat out there. Even if you don't live in Alaska at your local park, you never know what's hanging out, and I just like to sort of cultivate that in other people and get people inspired to go find wildlife and protect the wildlife in their own communities.
Mm, yeah.
And the success on social media has been an odd thing, as I'm sure most photographers would agree. Instagram algorithm is very fickle. Um, it's hard to really pinpoint one thing that will, determine whether something will do well or not. And so what it comes back to for me is I made the decision 2 years ago that I would prioritize, my mental health and just make sure that I'm only posting things because I'm truly excited about that or passionate about that specific post. And I think a lot of people feel this pressure from the algorithm to just post as much as possible, post every single day. That's the only way you're gonna get the following. That's the only way you're gonna make it as an influencer. Um, and I thought that was true, and I thought maybe I was making a sacrifice there when I made that decision. And I cut things back to post only once a week or maybe a couple times a week if I felt really inspired. But what surprised me was that it still worked. When I posted something that I was really excited about and shared that excitement with people, and came up with, a video edit that I was really excited to share,
Mm.
those were the ones that would oftentimes do really well. And,
Mm-hmm.
it's not going to be every post, but I would have that consistency because I was excited about it and I wasn't pressuring myself to the point where I would burn out anymore.
Mm.
So that's definitely something I would recommend people maybe experiment with, is to just think about quality over quantity at times,
Yep.
and just think about why you're doing photography in the first place.
Yeah, that's something that I feel like it's interesting that you bring that up because um, I don't know if you had seen it at the time, but recently I feel like that's a concept that I understand really well when it comes to YouTube, is like quality over quantity. But on Instagram, for whatever reason, I don't know. Yeah, I don't really know why, but I just kept doing like what I felt like I needed to do for forever. And only recently have I kind of just been like, you know what? Screw it. Like I'm not doing that anymore. I'm just going to post when I want to post, and I'm not even going to try to brand it. Like I'm just going to put up a post and I'm just going to say what I want to say in that moment about it. I'm not going to give it much, too much thought or anything. And I've stopped doing like reels on Instagram completely. After I went, viral like 2 years ago with a reel that got, I think, over 8 million views. It was just very deeply dissatisfying. And I realized at that moment that I really didn't care about the views. Like that wasn't what I was chasing after. I think the weird part where it does get conflated for me is that now that my career is largely built in doing wildlife photography, I do have to care about it somewhat. I do have to care about my exposure and all of that somewhat, but I guess deciding where I want to care about that has been very liberating for me as well. And ultimately, like Instagram, in the grand scheme of things, has made me very, very incredibly small proportion of my income as opposed to, my other kind of revenue streams and sources. So Instagram was one thing that for me, I was like, yeah, I don't feel like I need to do this anymore out of guilt. I'm just going to do it when I want to do it, So appreciate you sharing that. So
Definitely. And I remember seeing that post of yours recently, and I was like, that's the exact, pretty much word for word conclusion that I came to myself, and I'm glad to see that you're not putting that unnecessary pressure on yourself anymore.
Yeah.
And what I've realized is I had that video with the white ermine go viral, 161 million views. I mean, just like numbers I can't even comprehend.
Yeah.
And yeah, I got a huge following from it. But I don't know, 6 months later, my life hasn't changed much. There's very little difference in terms of, the print sales and clientele. What I've realized is, a lot of those people
Yep.
maybe loves the video that I initially shared, but they're not truly interested in what I have to share as content day to day.
Totally.
They're not as maybe interested in certain species that I share, and I'm okay with that. I'm like I said, I'm going to share what I want to share, and so I guess what I realized is, you develop these true fans that will actually become clients and customers. And, from a business standpoint, those are the people that are actually going to make a difference with your business. And all these sort of superficial numbers, the following, the views, that rarely actually translates to those true fans. So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep. That is so important to remember too. Yeah. Remembering who the core of your audience is made out of, and the people it is that are really interested. Because, yep, same thing. It was interesting for me when my reel went viral that I had, I had like, what would that number have been? I think I had 20x'd my following from that one reel at the time. But my, like, if you just give like a simple metric, like let's take a metric like likes per post, probably only went up like maybe 3 times the amount, maybe twice the amount, right? So it shows that even though I 20x'd my following, most of those were super cheap follows, not deep follows of people that were actually interested in my work as a whole. It was just a momentary like, oh, that's cool, follow, never see you again type of thing. So yeah.
Definitely.
So, totally.
And don't get me wrong, I mean, there's no rush like seeing that sort of validation from people you don't know online, where you're just getting constantly, your phone is blown up with these notifications, and it's quite the experience. But there's also sort of a level of depression in some ways after that. Once you lose that just sort of rush of sort of dopamine and approval, and it really just, I don't think it's worth chasing after.
Yeah. And the important thing too is there's a name for it. I can't remember the name of the what would the word be? Not like syndrome, but maybe a syndrome would be the word for it. But there's a name for it when I saw one time that there's like been lots of studies done on, for example, like people who win the Super Bowl or like win, just crazy climatic events where it's like few people in the world ever get to do it. It's like the climax of your life is what it feels like. And people who do that, and then immediately you're going to feel some sort of like depressive curve afterwards, because you just came off the highest high that you're ever going to get in your life. And when you come off that depressive curve, some people try to go immediately to the next thing. It's set another goal, move towards that goal, because otherwise I don't know who I am without that. But there's also some people that take that and then kind of sit on it, kind of experience that emotion, and then get back to work when, maybe it's a week or two later. And what they found is that people are able to maintain like a much better state of mental health when you're able to like come off a high like that and allow yourself to experience a little bit of that depressive curve, and like kind of take some time to ground yourself again in what reality might be like on a normal day-to-day basis, then hop back into like goal setting and the next thing. But when you're just constantly going from like one high to another, your brain doesn't have time to like catch up and actually get grounded in something really real at the moment, something like, maybe family or relationships or friendships, or, very tangible and things that are really essential to our being. So it's super important to remember that and that's something I always try to remember as I'm coming off a lot of the highs that I have with what I do. So, yeah.
Definitely. That's very insightful. And I had one person recommend that I take full advantage of this unique opportunity when I was, going viral, and that I should keep on posting every day and just sort of make the most of that, so that all of those views would translate into, those real fans that I was sort of talking about. But I just didn't have the time or energy to keep on leveraging that trend. And I got burnt out, and I gave myself almost a full month after that to just sort of collect myself and just focus on things that matter to me, like actually going out in the field and taking cool pictures.
Yeah.
And yeah, sure enough, I mean, the inspiration comes back, but
yeah, totally.
Yeah.
One thing I really enjoyed about watching you grow is your commitment to improving the quality of your content that you're doing, kind of like what we talked about earlier. Not only photographically, but also in videos, as you released that Caribou video, like I mentioned, that I was really impressed by. But you also recently released a video on finding and photographing lynx that was incredibly cool to watch. So to talk a little bit more about that recent film that you guys just released, let's bring on your brother Herman, who documented all the behind the scenes for you and kind of directed the film. So Herman, nice to have you on today.
How's it going, Jeremy? Nice to see you again.
Good, good. Yeah, watching your guys' Lynx film, I kept thinking to myself, man, these guys have a lot of persistence that I simply just don't have, which is why I've never tried camera trapping before. I won't spoil it too much for anyone who hasn't watched it yet, but what was it that kept you guys going day after day for the 2 weeks that you spent getting this Lynx image, and even when the images were turning up empty?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I would say this is a particular quality that Sergius possesses. Over the years, I've been really inspired by his ability to just go after a shot, you know, sort of whatever it takes. And so he inspires me for sure. I guess what I contribute is I come at it from kind of a different angle. You know, I'm not a photographer. I picked up a camera for the first time in September for our Caribou shoot, so I'm definitely new to this whole world. But I have a genuine desire to see whatever animal it is we're looking for. I love animals. I love Alaskan, especially wildlife. And so for me, it's like very personal. Like I could be out there with no camera, with no Sergius, although without Sergius, I probably wouldn't find anything, looking for an animal because I really see, you know, it's kind of a transcendent experience to witness an animal that nobody ever gets to see. And that could be true of birding, you know, finding a rare bird. And I like rare birds, but I like common birds too. I think animals are beautiful. So, you know, when it comes to an animal like a lynx, there's so much charisma. There's so much a natural awe associated with that animal. So, you know, yeah, it was hard to be out there for 2 weeks. Every day got a little bit harder. But, you know, you're seeing lynx tracks everywhere. You're seeing lynx scat. You're getting more and more indications that the animal is actually present. And so for every day, even though there were aspects of it that got harder, it was just more incentive to keep going, you know, because we were getting closer and closer. So,
yeah, that's good.
Yeah, and I mean, I when I photograph wildlife on my own, I rarely spend 2 weeks on a subject. Actually, I think this is probably the first time I've ever spent so much time focusing on one individual sort of shot or encounter. And to help with that, I mean, Herman was just really great to have along in terms of making sure all of our everything was organized, that we had the shots we needed for the YouTube video, just keeping everything very, very structured so that there was sort of this clear idea of what we were doing and what our objectives were each day. So that was really great to have. And then also just, I mean, we're brothers. I mean, we grew up together and we enjoy spending time around each other. So we definitely found ways to enjoy the 2 weeks.
Yeah, I love the aspect that you guys are brothers as well. My brother has shot 2 films for me. Yeah, most of the time he isn't able to because he lives away from me. But like for Yellowstone, he went with me to Yellowstone. He was my second shooter for that. And yeah, one of his comments was similar to yours, Herman, where he was like, you know, like, it's not like he didn't like animals before, but he's like, after this trip, like I started finding myself really caring about like, are we going to capture this animal or not? Like it like totally changes your perspective pursuing something like that. And
right.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. What did you learn about camera trapping, Sergius, through this experience, or both of you two? And would you try it again?
I learned that it takes a lot of patience and adaptability. As our friend Ryan Pennessy, featured in the film, mentioned, anything that can happen will happen. And that was definitely true for us. We lost a Flash to just poor decisions and poor planning, and snow melting a little, ice melting a little sooner than expected, and losing that to the water. Just countless false triggers that would drain batteries. There's really no end to the amount of things that could go wrong. to prevent you from getting that shot. So it's absolutely just a game of persistence and knowing your equipment, going out there and understanding the wildlife behavior as well. So I would absolutely do it again because I think the payoff is just so great, and it's a good way to just have sort of like a camera working behind the scenes for you while you're going out and focusing on other trips. So I would love to get to the point where I have 3 or 4 set out for an entire summer and just collecting photos of bears, fishing, salmon, and wolves, lynx, just whatever I can find. There's really interesting potential to show some elusive species with more of an environmental portrait approach.
Yeah,
where you show it in its environment and its sort of undisturbed behavior without that human element.
And I would say for me, you know, I definitely, again, sort of on my own devices, left to my own devices, I would not be out there setting up a camera trap. I just don't have that drive. I'm not looking for that shot necessarily. It's never really been part of, you know, my deal, how I approach wildlife. But I would say I was a little bit hesitant about this video concept because, you know, I knew what trail cam footage looked like. And so I thought, okay, you set up your camera and you wait, like that's it. It's kind of like, or even just like trapping, you set up your trap, things can go wrong, but you know, it's like a pretty straightforward concept. So I'm like, well, how are we going to make a story out of that? But I guess it's good for the story and horrible for us that it actually turns out to be extremely difficult. So, you know, any notions that we were sort of cutting corners for a shot, just for the punchline of our video, like that all went away. I'm sure Sergius knew that already, but for me, that went away on day one. Cause you know, I think honestly, the biggest factor is just the weather. There's so much that you can't control, and you're still, you know, Sergius is still looking for that same, you know, that same quality of shot that runs through his entire portfolio. And the jump from getting a lynx's butt on a trail cam to like a well-framed environmental portrait, you know, where you can see a lynx's entire body and its face, that's a massive jump. So yeah, it was definitely a learning experience for all parties involved.
Yeah, it was very apparent and cool to see you guys go through that process of trial and error and really working hard for that shot. And it's precisely the reason why I haven't tried it yet. So, yeah.
I don't hold that against you.
Yep. But man, yeah, it was very cool and rewarding to see you guys wind up with some results at the end. And also that moment you guys were, I shouldn't say too much, but let's just say that the sound of the lynx was shocking. I was very surprised to hear the sound that I heard coming out of its body. So that was pretty cool.
So were we.
Yeah. Yeah, it's fun getting to talk with another team about how they shot a wildlife photography film on YouTube, because I feel like besides myself, I don't really know of any others that are putting on, you know, kind of produced films with someone who's second shooting for them as well. And so why is it important for you, Sergius, I guess, to have Herman helping you behind the scenes?
Well, these sort of films, they really are, you know, short films that, you know, we've got essentially a script and it's never going to be predictive. You know, we always adapt based on how things happen, how things play out. But it's a very sort of organized film that we make for these YouTube videos. And that's something I would never be able to do on my own. I am absolutely, you know, primarily focused on getting the wildlife photos. And so the whole setup required for getting behind the scenes footage of me, the B-roll involved, all the work, really, I would never be able to do that on my own. And so this partnership really just kind of grew organically. Herman's, he can speak to this more himself, but we've always just loved sharing sort of the Alaskan wilderness and going on our own multi-day hikes together, just enjoying each other's company in this beautiful state. And Herman's also taken interest into directing a little bit. So this sort of just merged beautifully, and thankfully he was kind enough to volunteer some of his time to sort of invest in this YouTube channel and see where it can take us.
Yeah.
So I'm very grateful to him for being willing to dive into this with me.
Yeah, it's like, you could use the word volunteering, but I see it as like a once in a lifetime opportunity. I mean, I'm always looking for excuses to go back to Alaska. I live in Indianapolis now with my family, my wife and 3 kids. And Indianapolis has its perks, but it's not Alaska. So if I can ever head back for any reason, you know, even if it's not related to seeing, you know, one of the most uncommonly seen animals, in this case, the lynx in the state, or even, you know, the North America, like, it's just a privilege. So
yeah, and like what you were saying, Sergius, about being fully concentrated on the photos, like, there's no way like, even for my own work, just speaking out of personal, you know, experience, there's no way I could possibly film at the level of quality I want to be able to film and capture B-roll at, and all of that stuff, while still getting a half decent and usable wildlife image, you know? So yeah, it's really, really so key. And I mean, especially when you get into those live moments, like something I love seeing in your guys' Caribou film and now this Lynx film is like seeing those moments where like you're able to, like, in that moment, Herman's like, just like, it's so intense and kind of real in that moment, because Herman's like capturing the moment as it happens, right? So like you're seeing you like panic as the lynx is like out, and you're like, oh, like trying to get this shot and it's not working out, and you're seeing all of that emotion, versus like, you know, in my early days, I'd try to stage that emotion, and it's just like, it's just not the same, you know, it's not the same, and it's not as interactive, and you can't see the wildlife actually out in the field. And so I love seeing that in your guys' stuff. Yeah, it's really, really cool to see, and I hope that you guys are able to keep doing that.
Thank you.
You talked about kind of scripting and directing and all of that stuff, and I love hearing as well that you guys are approaching it with that kind of a mentality. What's your kind of vision, I guess, Herman, and putting a project like this together, and how do you guys communicate with each other? Because, you know, Sergius is kind of the photographer, you're kind of the director. How do you communicate with each other and making sure that you're on the same page and kind of, you know, getting all the boxes checked that both of you guys are interested in having checked, and so on and so forth?
I would say putting on a director's cap. Sergius's whole career makes my job a lot easier. One of the trips that we did together a couple years ago, we went to Nome with a couple of Sergius's buddies, and we were photographing muskox. And the entire time I was just thinking, like, we could be making like an incredible film out of this. And actually, in that case, a good friend of Sergius, Chris Luckenbach, actually did film it, and it's on YouTube now. And it's a great video, and it sort of encompasses the entire trip, sort of a travelogue video. But I just kept, in the back of my head, I was like, you know, if we honed in on that photographer's journey, there's a drama inherent there already. You know, I don't really have to write a script. I don't have to write, like, you know, act 1, act 2, act 3. It's already there. So, and I'm also really privileged in the sense that Sergius has already developed this really solid following, and he already has a style. You know, he's already got a kind of shot that he's looking for. He's already proven that he can get good images of any species, even underwater octopus, you know, just crazy range. So I have so much less work to do. I just saw a movie in every project that Sergius would tell me about on the weekend. And then as far as communication, you know, we do have to communicate quite a bit because there are so many moving parts. And, you know, we need to make sure that the channel on YouTube is like perfectly aligned with Sergius's Instagram brand and his brand as a guide and a naturalist. But even though it requires a lot of communication, just like anything, it's not difficult communication. And you know, we end up agreeing on almost everything. We have really similar tastes, I would say, in music and film. So, you know, and we grew up together again. So it's like we kind of know what we're both going after. Yeah, we are definitely in sync. Again, that doesn't ever undermine the role of communication. You know, I think any successful relationship has constant communication, sort of no matter how natural it is. And I think that's just, you know, it speaks to our good pairing as a partnership that we can do that.
Yep. So,
and I'll also say, like, I have an academic background. I've always loved looking into sources. So when it comes to sort of the understated but still very present documentary context, historical context, conservational context of these videos, I love doing that. So I think that's another aspect in which, you know, I can bring an element of interest that Sergius might not spend his free time on, and we could just get a video that's that much better.
That is apparent because yeah, like even watching your Caribou video, that's something that like I don't have much of a natural interest or passion for. Even as, you know, interesting as I may find it, I don't go through the weeds trying to research and look for that stuff. But like in your guys' Caribou video, it was really cool watching, you know, that background and kind of like all the history behind the Caribou and how you kind of laid that out with your infographics and everything. And that was awesome to watch, and something that like I've never taken the time to do, but I was like, oh, that's a really good take and kind of element to be able to add into the video. So loved that.
Yeah, I'm all about the weeds.
Yeah.
That's my thing.
Yeah.
I was going to say, I mean, I have plenty of interest in the conservation and history of certain, you know, animals in Alaska, especially, and conservation success stories. But I'm not the kind of person to spend the time to actually really dig into the research. So Herman has a very helpful skill there, and he's got that drive to just really dig into it and find, you know, whatever story there is kind of hiding in all the documents online.
Yep. Yeah, totally. I love that. That takes a certain skill too. What is kind of the most powerful maybe storytelling techniques that you guys have learned with the most recent videos that you've made?
I kind of have several answers to this. I would say the most technical answer would be that documentary angle. You know, that's very deliberate. How much of that to sprinkle in, how much to leave out. I mean, there is so much that we left out of the Caribou video, for instance. You know, the relationship between caribou habitat and wildfires, the relationship between Native Alaskans and their hunting strategies, you know, the Dena'ina people trapping like snare traps in caribou, and like early sightings of caribou. There was this guy Stone, Andrew Jackson Stone, I think is his name, who the Stone's sheep is named after. There was actually a subspecies of caribou, Stone's caribou, named after him as well, which was considered exclusive to the Kenai Peninsula. And I was like, oh my gosh, like, but then it got hunted to extinction. And I was like, can we do this? Can we tell this story? Is this an angle we can take? And it took like, honestly, 2 months of looking into that question for me to say no. Like, I don't want to, you know, play something up that's not there, because eventually the sort of scientific consensus is that it was miscategorized as a subspecies. But that was such a tempting, low-hanging piece of fruit. But I would say, just in general, that documentary element, I think in the Caribou, it's like 2.5 minutes that ends up in the video, which I think was kind of perfect. So that's probably the most technical answer to that question. You know, as far as like stories and stuff, it's all feel. I just go by feel. And like I said earlier, wildlife photography is inherently dramatic. What Sergius does when I'm not there, what he does on a daily basis has drama in it. And you know, it's not just the gnome trip. We've done a lot of things together. He came down to Indiana at one point, and he spent as much time as possible out in the field. And it's Indiana, but he found river otters, like one of 2 or 3 populations that have been reintroduced in the state. He found a snowy owl that made its way down here a couple of years back. Short-eared owls. There was a big short-eared owl fiasco. At one point we saw like 50. It's all things that I didn't know were even here, that he revealed to me. So just by following Sergius and watching how he approaches animals and prepares for these trips, I saw this inherent drama. So as an editor, I don't feel like I have to fabricate anything. Like, oh, I need to put this, you know, this section back here and switch this timeline so that there is drama where there wouldn't be otherwise. After the Caribou video released, or right before it released, and Sergius saw the last edit, he said that the video was exactly what it felt like. And to me, that is like the greatest compliment you could give to an editor. And it's also the greatest testament to like what we're doing. It's not, it's real. Like it's hard and there's real payoff, you know, and those two things, the challenge and the payoff is all you really need. So, and then my last point would just be like, I grew up on the Kenai Peninsula. I love Alaska. So if I can do anything to A, bring people into that wildlife adventure, but B, just introduce people to Alaska. I mean, you know, there are plenty of videos and channels that do great without a single animal. It's just Alaska. You know, so the fact that we get Sergius's passion, the rare animals we're looking for, and the, you know, stunning Alaskan landscape that we both grew up in, it's it makes it feel, I mean, it takes a lot of work, but I think on like a fundamental level, it's effortless.
I don't know if I can follow up that answer. That's pretty well-rounded.
This mic drop.
Hit all the points.
No, that's good. It's cool getting to see you guys work together, and you guys have made an awesome team so far, and I'm excited to see what you continue to produce and all that good stuff. So, Herman, it's been good getting to have you on here today, and thanks for coming on.
Yeah, thanks for your enthusiasm, man. I really appreciate it.
So, Sergius, I got one more question for you before we close out the podcast. As I asked to everyone who comes on, what is the single most important thing to remember in wildlife photography?
I kind of touched on this earlier a little bit, but really just do it because you love it, not because some algorithm is pressuring you to make these decisions and get out and post even when you don't feel like it. And really just embrace the passion and sort of fully dive into that inspiration that you have when you first start off in this field. That's, I think, the biggest piece of advice I could give you, just because that is by far the most sustainable approach to really anything that you care about, is just, you know, keep that inspiration alive and really just do it because it's an incredible thing to be doing, spending all this time out in the wilderness with these amazing creatures.
Remembering that deeper purpose and reason why. I love it. Yeah, thank you for sharing, and thanks for coming on the podcast today. It's an honor getting to have you on, and I'm excited to have you on this year as a judge for the competition. So
yeah, thanks so much for having us on. This was a really fun conversation.
Thank you all for watching. If you'd like to see more from Sergius Hannan, make sure to check out his YouTube channel in the description below, and to see his recent Lynx film that he produced with his brother. Also, the 2024 Wildlife Photography Competition will be launching soon, and I'll be giving my first info send out to my newsletter subscribers on it, along with a special deal exclusive for all of them. So if you're interested, make sure you subscribe to the Wilder leaflet below in the description, and I'll see you guys in the next video.